Thank you for listening to North Star's Private Equity Fast Pitch. Our host, Jeff Henningsen, president of Lockton Companies in Houston and the podfather of private equity, will be speaking with Steve Lebowitz, a founding partner and the managing partner of Brand Velocity Partners. Steve combines financial expertise with a disruptive approach to value-add strategies in private equity. Previously, he was a co-founder and a managing partner of a lower middle market private equity fund focused on the consumer sectors. Brand Velocity Partners is on a mission to disrupt the private equity landscape in a way that benefits all stakeholders. Today they'll be discussing how a company's brand is one of the most important aspects of their business, how BVP differs from the standard private equity models, and finally, his advice to young professionals as they embark on their new career path. And now your host, Jeff Henningsen.
Steve, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. It kind of, in our prep calls, it took me back to some early days in my career from 90 to 94 with a guy named Randy Best. He had a fundless sponsor. You know, you guys are an independent sponsor, virtually the same structure of what we had back then. Randy was very focused on consumer brands and doing some really cool things, which as we've gotten to know each other, I just am really looking forward to sharing some of the tentacles you have in the consumer space. So if you would, why don't you get us kicked off, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Brand Velocity Partners, and we'll get into it.
Thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate it. So Steve Lebowitz, I'm the managing partner of Brand Velocity Partners. We are a private equity firm. We focus primarily on consumer-facing companies with 10 million or greater of EBITDA in the United States and Canada. We love consumer brands. We invest in companies which we think are defensible and we think there are really good opportunities to grow their brands. The thing that makes us different at BVP is we have a tremendous amount of marketing resources. You know, that's not typically an area that private equity is known to focus on. But when you're talking about consumer brands, we think it's critical. The brand is one of the most important aspects of a business. And to be able to bring resources to the table that often we find the companies don't have themselves to help them to grow and take the business to the next level. So we love to look at companies that have brands. The brands don't necessarily have to be big household names at the time, but that there's a brand there and something that we believe we can work with and really expand together with the management of the company.
And you started BVP about 3 years ago. Can you talk to me about your background before then and what led you to start the firm?
We started BVP about 3 years ago with my partners, Drew Scheinman and Austin Ramos. At my prior firm, one of the companies that I was supervising, which was a toy company, I got a cold call from a senior executive from Endeavor, which is the world's largest talent management agency. And that person who cold called me, it was Drew, and he had reached out about the opportunity of that company to partner with Kobe Bryant. So that was a very interesting process with Kobe. And through that process, Drew and I became friends, and we just really hit it off. And him coming from a world of consumer brands at the nexus of the brands with entertainment and athletes and entertainers being used to grow their own brands or to grow the consumer brands. And together with Drew, Austin and I had worked together for years at my prior firm. And so the three of us basically hatched this idea for a different sort of private equity firm that would utilize the sort of power of marketing to bring them to companies, which we think would really differentiate us from a lot of other private equity firms that are out there.
And you mentioned private equity firms, and I have a pretty broad spectrum of young professionals and college students that listen to this podcast. Private equity is a very broad term. Can you talk about the differences between a fund or a private equity group with a fund and an independent sponsor, which is your model?
Sure. So a private equity fund has committed capital. So they're limited partners that sign up basically to a blind pool, and they're committed to put up a certain amount of money, whatever it is they agree to. And then the fund will call that capital down over time to invest in particular deals. As an independent sponsor, we do not have committed capital. So we don't have LPs that have signed up for a blind pool. What we do is we bring individual deals to the table to investors, and the investors have the ability, they can invest if they like. If they don't want to invest, they don't invest. So each deal essentially stands on its own, and it is not a blind pool of capital. Another thing which I would mention is that some independent sponsors out there effectively bring the deals that they have to other funds, and then the fund will ultimately do the deal with the independent sponsor as a sort of partner. Our model is more to raise money from limited partners. So we're not like bringing the deal to a fund, we're bringing the deal to limited partners. It could be an institutional limited partner, it could be a family office, it could be high net worth, athletes, entertainers. Those are folks that we have as investors. So we will bring them particular deal opportunities.
For those that aren't familiar with the independent sponsor model, passing the hat, if you will, for a new portfolio company isn't as easy as it sounds. You've got to have pretty deep connectivity and trust from those investors. How did you and your partners go about developing those relationships?
Well, I spent my career personally, I spent 17 years in private equity before founding BVP. So I've had experience and track record in doing deals and developing relationships. You're right that trust is really what it's about. I'd say it's about trust and quality deals. There is more money out there than there are good deals to be had. And so if you have the ability to find good deals, you should be able to find capital for the deal if the deal makes sense, as long as you've got a reasonable thesis and the deal stands on its own. So I don't view that as a tremendous obstacle. I think the bigger obstacle is finding the quality deals, at a reasonable price. That I think is where it's tougher.
Well, let's dive into that for a minute. Finding quality deals, how does that work in your world? And there's so many private equity firms, investment bankers chasing opportunities. It's got to be a fairly competitive landscape. How do you guys go about that?
It is, and in many ways, it's the most critical aspect. If you're an investment firm, you need to find those good deals. Of course, you have to be able to vet them as well and be able to tell if they're good or not, and then have a way to add value to them. But finding the deal is always the biggest challenge. And there are all sorts of different ways. In terms of what we do, we'll reach out directly to companies. If there are companies that we like, we work with partners that can reach out to companies. We partner with executives sometimes that are very distinguished in their industries, and they like what the BVP platform brings to the table. So we can partner with them and potentially get access to their network and their deal opportunities. We also network with investment bankers who are, for their job, they're selling companies or raising money for companies. So we certainly spend time with them as well. With the investment bankers, you have to really pick your spots, because sometimes they may be bringing a company out to quite a few potential buyers. And as a result of that, you have to decide whether it's worth your time to allocate to something where you feel like there are a lot of potential buyers looking at that deal. So do you have a special sauce or something? But I'd say in terms of finding the deals, it's all of those different things. But fundamentally, it gets down to building relationships with all sorts of different folks that have access to the deals, or who run companies or have a relationship with the company. And you just have to be out there, and hopefully you have something that is different and special about whatever you're doing, that it grabs their attention, because as you said, there is so much competition out there.
For those listening, I would encourage you to go to the BVP website, and I'll ask you a question about this, but there's a really cool picture that displays the connectivity of the founding partners of BVP. I would imagine that has a huge advantage in not only sourcing, but maybe even closing deals with the logos of experience that I'm looking at when I look at that page.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I think that for us, the things that set us apart are the marketing expertise, and that comes through very strong and deep agency relationships, which we partner with on deals. They can potentially get a piece of our carried interest in the deal, so that the agencies are aligned like partners. We've got a lot of connectivity and with athletes and entertainers and sports leagues, and that particularly comes out of Drew's background. Drew spent his whole career in that world, and so we can bring that to bear on the companies. And that's with all that connectivity and that cool sort of slide that you're mentioning, with all the different leagues and companies on it. And then the other aspect that's very important to us is really we're very employee centric relative to, I'd say, a typical private equity firm where the well-being of employees is not generally high on the list of priorities for private equity. And yet we think that's the wave of the future. So we have a variety of programs which we're developing around that. And it's important for us in terms of how we interact with the founders of businesses because they care a lot about the legacy of their business and their employees.
And you mentioned the word agencies, and for those that aren't familiar with that, well, they're familiar with the term, but the agency relationships that you have, those are typically like sports agencies, marketing agencies, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Marketing agencies and these agencies, they have different areas of expertise, but they will partner with the company. Traditionally, it would be on a sort of service provider basis, and for a retainer, some sort of fee for service, they would provide marketing services in whatever their area of expertise is. It could be some aspect of brand building, it could be digital performance, different agencies, different things. In our case, we do work with different agencies, and again, we can give them a portion of our carried interest so that they're incentivized like owners, and they can provide a discounted rate to the companies that they work with because they are getting a piece of the carried interest.
When I would imagine they're getting a first view at young, undiscovered rocket ship brand that's coming out that they're hopefully putting in front of you to potentially partner with.
Our hope is that over time that will develop, because you want to find great companies wherever they are. And that is a potential place you can find them is through an agency relationship. So we look for that from any group we would partner with. But certainly agencies, they do get to see a lot of cool brands.
Steve, there's a lot of PE firms that have board of advisors, advisory executives. You call your folks that are, in my mind, in that same role, accelerators. It's a very, very impressive group of folks. Can you talk about their role and how you lean on them and what they do with BVP?
Well, it's a good question, and we love the group of accelerators we have, and we call them accelerators because we're really looking to accelerate the brands of the companies we buy, and there are different ways to potentially do it. We think the sort of board of advisors or whatever, it's kind of a tired term, and what we don't want to have is just a bunch of faces and names and resumes. We want people who are authentically engaged. So we view ourselves as, yes, we're a financial firm, but we view ourselves as a movement. And that's not a typical thing for a private equity group to call themselves. But when I was mentioning earlier about the employee-centric focus and things that we do in that, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, the sort of some of the specific things, we view that as a wave of the future, and it's an area where private equity really lags in terms of like recognizing the value of employees. And if a company is going to be bought by private equity, the employees are not typically jumping for joy. So that group of accelerators, they're awesome, mixture of CEOs and chief marketing officers and finance folks and executives and athletes, entertainers, all sorts of different folks in there. But the common thread is the movement that I was saying. It is really this mission of BVP, and we're going to be a great investment firm, and we're going to go deliver great returns to the investors. But we're also going to make a difference while we do it for the employees of the companies that we buy. And we're going to provide a different model. So that is what brings that group together. It's really the mission that brings them together, and how they can serve the mission and how we can work with them. That is very case by case. It depends. Some people want to be deeper involved than other ones. And we can really structure in a case by case basis how deep an accelerator wants to go with a particular company. They may even bring us a company. So we can be flexible in terms of how we would compensate them depending on what they do. But what brings that whole group of people together is the mission.
When I see one that jumped out at me is barbecue guys. And as I was looking at the website and prepping for this call, I see the Mannings are all over it, including Cooper. But I noticed there's some athletes, celebrities in your mix. That's one of the other ways that they can help accelerate and obviously take a piece of the upside as being one of your partners.
That's right. Yeah, Cooper is a great guy. He is hilarious, successful businessman. We have good relations with the whole Manning family. In the case of barbecue guys, Archie Manning is involved, Cooper, Eli, and Peyton. They're all involved with barbecue guys. And, they came as investors originally into that deal. And we saw an opportunity there with barbecue guys being a Louisiana company and Manning's being a Louisiana royalty. When you take that plus, the obvious linkage between sort of barbecue and football and tailgate. So made a lot of sense. And I don't know if you've seen the commercials, but we have commercials with the whole clan there and they're very funny and they're good, authentic family commercials. And, so we love that the Manning family, they're a great family and a great match for BVP and also for barbecue guys.
Any other accelerators that stand out in your group that have been deeper entrenched in your success and what you're doing so far?
So it's a terrific group of people, and we're really beginning to activate them like now because we're a young firm and we've been so swamped just with the initial deals that we did that, we're really still devising and working and improving, which by the way, that's for any entrepreneurial business, we view ourselves as an entrepreneurial business. So you're evolving, you're being flexible. So in terms of the accelerators, like one accelerator that we work very closely with is Whitney Johnson. And she was, the first accelerator actually that we brought on board. And Whitney she's an author, TED talker, business disruption theorist. She was just selected, I think, 8th in the Thinkers 50, which is the top business thinkers in the world. And this year she was ranked number 8. And she has a partner, Amy Humble, who's also great. And so they work with us on coaching because, getting back to what I said about employee-centric, we think it's very important to nurture the human capital in companies. So Whitney and Amy are coaches. And so they provide not only us coaching, but they provide coaching to the senior management teams of our portfolio companies. And, it's a sort of partnership relationship where it's a mixture of sort of, compensation and also carried interest participation in our general partners. So they are true partners. And that is sort of the model for certain accelerators, if you're going to go deep with them in a deal or in a strategy where you can really bring them in effectively as a part-time partner in BVP.
I see a couple different portfolio companies, a shoe company, a couple in the barbecue space. Anything in particular that attracted you to those? Was it more their kind of what you're talking about earlier with the Mannings, Louisiana, barbecue, football, all that combination, or any stories you can tell us about why those 3 were your first 3?
It's an interesting question because you can source deals based off of what you get because there's a certain serendipity to it based off of what comes in the door and whether or not it fits what you want to do. Or you could take sort of a global top-down approach where you're saying we are going after this particular segment in this industry. And I would say that we like the segments that we've invested in quite a bit, but there is some element of serendipity as well in terms of we do outreach to industries that we like. So in the case of actually all 3 of those deals did come from looking at industries that we like. What is it that we like? We love outdoor. That's an area that we like. This is before the pandemic, but we think outdoor is just it's an area that has grown over time, and we think will continue to grow. So we like businesses that inspire passion. I would say in the case of the footwear business, it's a military law enforcement business called Original Footwear. They have a growing consumer business. So that business, it's got tremendous brand heritage because of the service of the military. Their boots were used in the Vietnam War as the sort of definitive jungle boot. So tremendous heritage of the brand, authenticity. opportunity to expand it into consumer. So we love authenticity in the brands. That's something that will kind of go through, all the sorts of business that we look at. We love businesses where it inspires passion. Enthusiast brands, we love that. Again, just because there's a certain inelasticity to the demand when you're dealing with something that people are truly passionate about, and we think it creates more defensibility. So those are areas that we particularly like.
What do you see in 2022 or beyond? Any trends that are interesting to talk about, coming out of COVID, supply chain issues, consumer buying habits?
I think it'll take a while for the supply chain to resolve itself. I mean, it's pretty screwed up, and you've got this dynamic where the supply chain is a vicious challenge on margins and in meeting the demand. On the flip side, the demand, particularly for goods companies, consumer goods, is very high. So it's a bit of a balance between those two factors. It will at some point resolve, and I imagine the two resolutions may come together to some degree, where there may be more of a normalization of demand, which eases the demands on the supply chain. So at some point, I would expect that to happen, whether it is in 2022 or beyond. But at some point, I'd expect there to be both the demand and the supply to normalize to some extent. I think that the trends that happen in COVID are probably here to stay. I think outdoors is here to stay. I think that consumer behavior has been altered for a long enough period of time that will have enduring effects. I think people enjoy being in their backyard. They enjoy entertaining at their home. I think there's a housing boom. It won't go on forever, but I think that goes on for a while. So I think those things will endure. I think another thing that's probably enduring is, I think, more flexible work structures, and that's because people like it. I think people will go back to the office, and many have, especially in finance industry. But I don't know that it's going to be a 5-day-a-week thing, because people have figured out that you don't need 5 days a week in the office. I speak with a lot of folks, and it seems pretty common, at least in finance. It's generally 3 days a week, some 4, but honestly, 5 days a week is few and far between. Speaking for myself, I don't see the need for it 5 days a week. So I think a lot of times that will result in that more flexible structure. I think that will endure.
People our age learned by being around our bosses and around our ecosystem of folks that we're working with. How do you deal with that or address that going forward with these 20-somethings that want to work from home in their pajamas, but they're not getting that learning? You mentioned, actually, we were talking before about your dog, and I give this analogy a lot, but we had a 10-year-old Labrador and ended up having a puppy Labrador, and they just learn by being around each other. They follow each other around. They learn when to eat and where the door is and where the rug is, and et cetera. And when you're in a remote world, you don't have that just osmosis that happens. How would you approach that going forward?
It's a really good question. Really good question. By the way, we have a lab too. She's 3, and she's great. Labs love. They can basically summarize by love and food. Like, those are the 2 things that define a lab. That's a really good point. Not just for millennials, and clearly that there's that's a real issue for employers in terms of millennials enjoying not being in the office. But I think it's true for everyone. The reality is we are social animals, and there's no substitute for in-person interaction. We started at BVP. We started without an office because we were a brand new firm, and then the pandemic happened. So we don't have an office. We have space we can use in the city. But recently, I did travel somewhat throughout the pandemic. And then, recently, in the last month or so, I've been back to a couple of conferences, and there's no substitute for that. And I think it's important for anybody, whether, our age or millennial, or that you want to have that in person, because that's the nature of the human being. We're not meant to just be isolated and sitting at a desk all day. So I think it's a balance, because there is a convenience that comes from sitting at the desk and the time that's saved, but you can't substitute for in person. Like, a brainstorm session that's done in person is not the same as one that is done over the phone. We're animals. We're human animals. We capture nuance. We capture people's emotions. You can't get it in the same way through remote. So I think it's very important that there are both. But if you do only one, I think it will be warped in some respects. So I think you need to have a balance.
So this leads me to a common question I ask all my guests. I have a lot of college students and young professionals that listen to the podcast. What advice would you be giving to somebody who's probably in their 20 to late 20s, who's an aspiring private equity or investment banker?
I would say, as corny as it may sound, like you really do have to pursue what you want in life. And it is very easy as a high achiever sort of person to just go down a certain track and think that that's automatically what you should do. So you need to pause and decide, are you actually enjoying what you do? And are you doing what you want to do with the one life that you get? So like you really have to pause and think about that. And then assuming whatever that answer is, and if it's to be in private equity, be persistent. Be persistent. The Beatles got turned down by every single possible, music company until one finally gave them a shot. And you have to be persistent. I started off as an attorney, and it was not a natural, necessary, easiest path to go from attorney to being an investor, because people say, "Oh, you're an attorney. What do you know about investing money?" And I educated myself on the side because I had passion for it. And if you have passion for it, you will do the things, you need to do in terms of getting educated, doing the networking and stuff, but do not give up. Do not give up if that's what you want to do, and pursue it. Develop the skills that you need. Be creative about how to do it. Who's to say you can't go out and find your own deal? If you know someone, you're in the flow, you develop trust, why can't you do it yourself and maybe help line up a deal? There are different ways to do it, different ways to skin a cat, not just the traditional, Ivy League to Goldman Sachs to private equity. So believe in yourself. You have more control over your own actions and belief, and you can't control anybody else. So you need to be your number one advocate, and accept the fact that you're going to fall on your face at times. Falling on your face creates the best opportunities sometimes. I found the best opportunities I've had in life have often been the direct outcome of falling on my face and being motivated to get back on the horse and do it better or do it differently. Even though these things sound, I guess in a way they sound trite, the reality is that, from my life experience, it's actually real. And that's what I would recommend.
I mentor a lot of younger folks and have an education degree, so I enjoy coaching. And it's always amazing to me that people are trying to blaze their own path without really looking around. There's a ton of successful playbooks that somebody could follow, or pick a bunch of playbooks and take the best of each. But it's not that hard. Some of the things that you just said, again, sound like they're just the common answers that older successful folks in the industry give, but there's a reason that they give them.
You have to pause, and you need to pause and really think about what it is you're doing, and not just think about whatever the words are. You really have to look at the actions and use common sense. And if you pause, it is not ultra complicated in terms of what it is, but you have to do it. And the doing is a lot harder than the talking about it. And if I could pick one thing, I would say it's determination. If you're someone who's determined to get somewhere, I think you'll get there eventually. Because you get a lot of chances, because every day is a new day, and you get a lot of chances to apply your will towards something. And if you have the determination, eventually, by sheer law of averages, eventually it's going to work in your favor. The calculation will work, and coincidence happens. If you do it enough times, there will be coincidence. So I think you just have to be so dogged in your pursuit of things, and network, talk to people in the industry, network. People generally do want to help. They do want to give you advice, if nothing else. And when you talk with someone, ask them for someone else they should speak to, as a way to just network more. And then you just don't know what direction it takes. But I wish at 25, I knew what I know at 51, but that's kind of the nature of it. It's like when you have kids, it's like you can't be prepared to have a baby. People can tell you, oh, it's going to be a big change, but you can't really know until you actually live it. So,
right. Until you're exhausted at 3 a.m. and there's no end in sight for that baby that's not going to go to bed. There's no way to train for that. It's interesting because some of the things you were just talking about, the determination and the will to succeed and the drive to execute. In just my career, I've seen so many great ideas people are trying to raise money around, but you really don't see the determination or the execution that needs to happen to make it, a successful venture. And so I really stopped investing in startups and things like that a long time ago because of that. I would imagine in your seat, you're seeing all kinds of people come to you with amazing ideas, but the idea is not really the important part of it. It is a component, but the determination is more important.
There is no substitute for grit, determination, grit, whatever you call it. I'd say you combine that with the inspiration and you can create very special things, things that could potentially change the world, certainly be very economically successful. But you need to have both. If you just have one, you're not going to have the same level of impact.
So somebody in your area of focus, I'm sure, has a favorite quote, motto, or something like that. Do you have anything you can share with the audience?
Well, one thing that I live by, I don't think it's kind of my own quote, but it's like live in a way that would make your children proud. So for me, it's very important. You get one trip, and on that one trip, like you want to make a difference. You want to live in an ethical fashion, and you should never lose that. And you want your kids to see that you worked hard. You want them to see that you made a difference in some way, that it wasn't just that you earned a lot of money or whatever. Like that's nice, but it's not enough. You need to have some impact so that your life is meaningful and be an example for your kids. So to me, that's probably the most one. I also like, if you can dream it, you can do it, from Walt Disney, because I'm a big Disney fan. And being an entrepreneur myself, that really resonates with me. So I'd say some combination of those two.
As I said when I started out, I love the consumer space. It's just, there's so much creativity and excitement and things to talk about. And I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to share your story with our podcast listeners. Why don't I close with my typical question? If I'm an entrepreneur or founder of a rocket ship type of a brand that really needs to partner with somebody, clearly there's all kinds of different sponsors and investors that I could partner with. As I'm meeting with you and probably going to go talk to my spouse or co-investors later on tonight to make a decision on who I want to partner with, what are the key points you want me to be able to remember about BVP and why I should pick you as a partner to take me to the next level?
I would say it boils down really to two things. One is that we bring a tremendous amount of marketing resources to the table through the agency relationships, all the sort of partnership opportunities we can bring with athletes, celebrities. They can mean a lot for consumer brand, and that is not something that you can just do on your own. That's the first thing. The second thing I would encourage the founder to think about is how important the legacy of their business is, as well as the second bite of the apple. And there is not a firm out there that is more conscious about the employees and treating the employees right and giving them the opportunity to participate financially, as well as to grow professionally with BVP and what we're about. And there are lots and lots of private equity firms out there with different strategies and such, but I would put us up against anyone in terms of really building on the legacy of the business and giving the founder comfort that this is going to be a great place for many years to come for my employees, who I care a hell of a lot about.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and it's already exciting what you've done in the first 3 years, and I look forward to watching you continue to grow your portfolio of exciting brands and maybe add some accelerators down the road. So good luck to you in 2022.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Northstar's Private Equity Fast Pitch. For more information about Northstar and the Private Equity Fast Pitch, or our boutique heavy hitter events, you can visit us at enorthstar.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to receive the latest episodes from Northstar.